It was a warm May afternoon in Ouagadougou, 2025, when President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso received an unexpected call that would shift the tone of his entire day. His aide handed him the secure line with a cautious look. On the other end was Amanda Collins, the seasoned producer for CNN International, her voice calm but brimming with urgency. President Traoré, we'd like to invite you for a live interview on our flagship segment, Global Leaders. It'll be broadcast live in the United States and syndicated to 45 other countries, she explained crisply. At just 35, Ibrahim had risen rapidly through the military ranks to become the youngest head of state in Africa, earning global recognition for his outspoken views on African sovereignty and youth leadership. He leaned back in his chair, mentally juggling his packed schedule. "And what topics will you be covering?" he asked, his tone measured yet open. "We'd love to hear your insights on youth leadership, Africa's economic path forward, and your perspective on modern diplomacy," Amanda answered, her pitch both polished and persuasive. Ibrahim agreed without much hesitation. This was a kind of international stage he relished, where he could speak directly to millions. Within 2 hours, the Palace press team had transformed one of the smaller conference rooms into a makeshift broadcast studio. The air hummed with the quiet buzz of camera crews, adjusting lenses and sound engineers, fiddling with microphones, as Ibrahim smoothed the collar of his tailored navy suit. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., the sun was still rising over the White House. Inside the Oval Office, former President Donald Trump, now 78, sat flipping through news channels, a habit that kept him feeling plugged into the pulse of global politics. Melania Trump was seated beside him on a velvet settee, sifting through event invitations and gala requests that needed her attention. "Donald, who's this young African leader?" she asked, glancing at the screen where Ibrahim's name and title appeared in bold letters. "That's Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso. Just a kid, really," Trump replied, barely masking his dismissiveness. "He's been trying to make waves with all his big speeches about African independence. Thinks he's another Sankara." Neither of them knew that within minutes, what seemed like a routine international interview would detonate into an unexpected diplomatic spectacle. Inside the CNN studio, anchor James Richardson began with gentle, uncontroversial questions about Burkina Faso's recent development milestones. Ibrahim answered with calm precision, weaving in statistics about economic growth and regional partnerships that painted a picture of a nation on the rise. Then Richardson shifted gears, tilting his head slightly as he asked, "President Traoré, how do you see the role of first ladies in modern diplomacy?" Ibrahim's eyes lit up as he gathered his thoughts. "First ladies are crucial," he began, leaning forward slightly. "They humanize politics. They bridge cultural divides and symbolize the softer power of a nation." Richardson encouraged him with a nod. "Any examples that stand out to you?" Without pause, Ibrahim continued, entirely unaware of the storm he was about to stir up. "Melania Trump comes to mind immediately. She carries herself with remarkable grace. My wife Ajara always says she's the definition of elegance. In fact," he chuckled lightly, "before I met Ajara, I used to have a bit of a crush on Melania. I'd see her photos in fashion magazines as a young soldier. She was captivating." Back in the Oval Office, Trump's jaw tightened. Melania raised an eyebrow, both amused and slightly uncomfortable. "At least someone recognizes your elegance," Trump said stiffly, but Ibrahim wasn't done. "Of course, this was before she married President Trump," Ibrahim continued, his tone warm but naive to the consequences. "She was an icon of style, someone who inspired young people all over the world to dream bigger. That's the power of a first lady." Richardson visibly swallowed, sensing the temperature shift. "So, you admired the first lady before she entered politics?" he asked, clarifying. "Exactly," Ibrahim said with an easy smile. "When you're young and curious about the world, these figures leave a mark." The next moment inside the Oval Office was electric. Trump's face flushed red, the vein in his forehead pulsing. "What the hell did he just say?" he barked, leaning forward, eyes boring into the TV. Melania tried to wave him off. "Donald, he's just being polite. It's harmless." "Harmless?" Trump spat, now pacing in front of the couch. "He just told the world he had a crush on you. Live. On CNN." His aide scrambled in, alerted by the raised voice. John Kelly, back as his trusted chief of staff, tried to intervene. "Sir, it was just a passing compliment. Nothing more." Nothing more? He fantasized about my wife. Trump thundered, his eyes wild. Who does this kid think he is? Talking about my wife like she's some page 6 supermodel. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim remained oblivious to the uproar brewing across the Atlantic. James Richardson, sensing danger, attempted to pivot. "Let's switch back to economic reforms, Mr. President." But Ibrahim, still energized by his anecdote, added fuel to the fire. "You know," he said with a light laugh, "Ajara often jokes that if she hadn't met me first, I have flown to the U.S. to try and charm Melania myself. Luckily, Ajara saved me from that fate." Richardson nearly dropped his pen. In Washington, Trump's roar could have shaken the walls of the White House. Now he's saying he would have courted my wife? This is an insult to the presidency. An insult to America. Trump lunged the phone on his desk, jabbing the buttons. "Get me Blinken. Now!" Secretary of State Antony Blinken answered groggily, caught off guard. "Mr. President, what's the situation?" Trump's voice boomed through the receiver. "We're imposing sanctions on Burkina Faso, effective immediately." Blinken fumbled for context. "Sanctions? Sir, what's the justification?" "He humiliated my wife on live TV. Said he'd steal her. He's a threat. Put him on the watch list. This punk needs to learn respect." Trump snapped. Sarah Matthews, his press secretary, peered nervously into the room as the commotion escalated. Phones rang nonstop. Aides huddled in corners, and the Oval Office became ground zero for an emerging diplomatic fiasco. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim wrapped up his interview unaware that his offhand story about a teenage crush would ignite one of the most bizarre international standoffs in recent memory, one that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. "Mr. President, technically he only said he admired the First Lady as an example of diplomacy." "Technically?" Trump bellowed, his face now a furious shade of red. "Technically, he said he'd try to seduce my wife on live international television. That's not admiration. That's public humiliation." Melania, standing a few feet away, moved closer, hoping to defuse the situation. "Donald, please. You're overreacting. It was a clumsy joke. He's young, inexperienced with Western media. Are you defending him now?" Trump snapped, turning on her. "Maybe you enjoy this attention from that African boy." His words hung in the air like a bomb. Melania's eyes narrowed, her jaw tensing as an icy silence filled the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but edged with steel. "Donald Trump, you have just crossed a line you cannot uncross. Don't you dare question my loyalty because of your childish jealousy." Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré emerged from the palace studio with a wide, satisfied grin. "I think it went well," he told Ajara, who'd watched the entire segment just outside the camera's reach. "You mentioned Melania Trump multiple times," Ajara said, a subtle note of unease in her voice. "She's a strong symbol of modern diplomacy," Ibrahim said, brushing off her concern, oblivious to the diplomatic tempest brewing thousands of miles away. Just then, Musa Kaber, his usually unflappable communications chief, burst into the room, phone outstretched. "Mr. President, you need to see this." American Twitter is in flames. President Trump is on a rampage. Ibrahim squinted at the screen. The first tweet was already viral. The juvenile dictator of Burkina Faso just disrespected America's First Lady on live TV. There will be consequences. Ibrahim scrolled down, his brow furrowing. Another tweet read, "This so-called leader needs to learn some respect. Burkina Faso will face the full power of the United States. No one insults my wife." He looked up at Ajara, stunned. "I just said she was graceful and that when I was young." Ajara cut him off, exasperation creeping in, "and that you would have tried to win her over if you hadn't met me first. Ibrahim, you basically told the world you'd chased the wife of the President of the United States." In Washington, the White House was in full crisis mode. Trump stormed down hallway, flanked by aides who struggled to keep pace. Bursting into the Situation Room, He slammed his fist on the conference table. "I want every option on the table against Burkina Faso," he barked. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, lifted his eyes from a stack of briefings. "Mr. President, with respect, this was an awkward remark, not an act of war." "An act of war? That's exactly what it is." Trump roared. He said he'd seduce my wife. That a personal attack on the dignity of the United States. On a flickering monitor, Secretary of State Antony Blinken appeared via video. "Mr. President, we've already opened back channels with the embassy in Ouagadougou. We can smooth this over diplomatically." Trump let out a harsh laugh. "Diplomatically?" He mocked me. On CNN, "The world is laughing at me, at us. There will be sanctions, embargoes, frozen accounts. I want them to feel it." As Trump continued venting, word of the brewing crisis spread across Africa. Some heads of state texted Ibrahim privately. A few offered cautious advice, while others found situations so absurd they couldn't suppress their laughter. Back at the presidential palace, Ibrahim convened an emergency meeting. His top ministers sat in a tight circle around a polished wooden table. Stacks of reports spread before them. Tension clung to the air like humidity before storm. Dr. Ouedraogo, the foreign minister, leaned forward, voice steady but strained. "Mr. President, the global press is calling this a diplomatic standoff. We must issue a formal response before this spirals further." Ibrahim rubbed his temples. "What does our legal counsel say?" His legal advisor flipped through notes. "Technically, you haven't violated any international statutes. Freedom of speech covers your comment. But diplomatically, it's a disaster." Ibrahim finished, eyes darkening. Ajara appeared at the door, her expression pinched with worry. "I just got off the phone with our American embassy contact," she said. "Washington wants an immediate retraction. They want you to publicly apologize." "A retraction?" Ibrahim repeated, incredulous. "A retraction for what? For admiring their first lady? You didn't just admire her, Ibrahim." Ajara shot back, her tone sharper now. "You basically joked about pursuing her, and in Trump's mind, that's an unforgivable insult." Before Ibrahim could answer, Musa reappeared, this time carrying his laptop, eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, you should see this. It just escalated again." He turned the screen to show Trump's latest tweets. "Sanctions against Burkina Faso go into effect immediately. Mineral exports frozen. Financial channels cut off. This African boy will learn respect the hard way." Ajara's hand flew to her mouth. "Ibrahim, he's serious." Ibrahim rose from his chair, pacing to the tall windows overlooking Ouagadougou streets. Outside, the city carried on as usual. Street vendors haggling over mangoes, taxis weaving through the midday heat. Ordinary people completely unaware that their livelihoods now hung in the balance over a single offhand remark. He turned back to his cabinet, the weight of leadership settling like lead on his shoulders. "So this is where we are, a joke turned into a geopolitical hammer." Ajara's voice cracked slightly. "Our people will suffer because of this. We need a strategy. Now." Ibrahim exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. He had stood firm against rebel generals and survived coup plots, but he had never imagined fighting a diplomatic firestorm sparked by an innocent, if foolish, comment. The room fell silent as the gravity of the moment sank in. Outside, Ouagadougou carried on, but inside the palace, the future of a nation was being rewritten, because one man's pride had turned a compliment into a crisis. Ibrahim turned to her, resolve flashing in his eyes. "Then let's do something President Trump would never expect. Let's handle this like grown-ups." 2 hours later, across the Atlantic, Trump stormed into the White House press briefing room. The world's press corps had packed the hall, cameras trained on the podium, the air electric with expectation. "The President of the United States does not tolerate disrespect," Trump began, his voice ringing with fury. Ibrahim Traoré made a grave mistake when he spoke inappropriately about the First Lady. Reporters scribbled frantically. The tension snapped when Sarah Johnson of CNN raised her hand. "Mr. President, do you really believe economic sanctions are proportionate for an offhand comment? Proportionate?" Trump thundered. This African boy said, live on TV, that he would try to steal my wife. No leader on earth speaks that way about the First Lady of the United States. James Mitchell of the BBC tried a gentler angle. Mr. President, Traoré was referencing a time long ago, the First Lady's modeling days. It was clearly, I don't care if it was a century ago. Trump slammed his fist on the podium, making the microphones rattle. Melania Trump is my wife. Any man who talks like that about her insults America itself. A French reporter dared to question, Monsieur le President, don't these sanctions mostly hurt ordinary people in Burkina Faso who had nothing to do with the remark? Trump shot him a glare that could melt steel. Then the Burkinabés should choose their leaders more wisely. If they elect a child who can't respect another man's marriage, they'll pay the price. Actions have consequences. Thousands of miles away in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim and his ministers watched the broadcast on a grainy TV in the palace situation room. Each word from Trump landed like a slap. He's branding our people irresponsible, Dr. Ouedraogo muttered. His wounded pride is now an economic weapon, the finance minister added. Ibrahim's eyes never left the screen, but they narrowed when Trump barked. Ibrahim Traoré must learn to act like an adult, not a lovesick teenage boy. Silence filled the room. Then Ibrahim stood, his posture suddenly commanding. Prepare the cameras, he said quietly. We speak to the world. Right now. 1 hour later, Ibrahim entered the palace's small media studio. While Trump's fury had crackled like wildfire, Ibrahim exuded calm. Dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, he looked straight into the lens, a composed presence amid the storm. Citizens of Burkina Faso, leaders of the world, and to the American people, his voice was level, almost gentle. Today, President Trump decided to punish 22 million Burkinabés over a misunderstanding about a comment I made. He paused to let the weight settle. Let me clarify exactly what I said. As a young soldier, I admire Melania Trump as an international role model. That was over 15 years ago, when she was a celebrated figure in the fashion world. For young men in Africa, she symbolized elegance in a culture we rarely saw up close. He shifted slightly, eyes unwavering. In jest, I added that had I not met my beloved wife, Ajara, maybe I would have tried to meet Melania on one of her humanitarian visits. A harmless, nostalgic anecdote. Not an insult, not a threat. His tone sharpened, every word crisp as a blade. What troubles me is not President Trump's misunderstanding. It is his reaction. How can a 78-year-old leader, with all the power in the world, feel so insecure in his marriage that he mistakes praise for threat? In Washington, Trump sat alone, glued to the screen. Melania refused to watch beside him. Ibrahim leaned closer to the camera. Mr. Trump, your sanctions do not starve me. I will eat, I will sleep. But they will hurt children, mothers, and workers who had no part in this. You punish my people because of your wounded pride. He paused, then delivered a line that would be replayed on every network for days. If you react like this to a harmless comment, how do you respond to real threats to American security? The final blow. Maybe the issue isn't what I said about Melania. Maybe the issue is how you treat Melania. The room behind him fell silent. Across social media, the reaction was instant. Hashtags like hashtag insecure Trump and hashtag Traoré truth shot to the top of trending charts. Commentators pounced. Ibrahim Traoré just gave a masterclass in statesmanship, said one CNN anchor. A 35-year-old with more composure than a 78-year-old president, posted a BBC correspondent. Tweets poured in by the second. Trump is punishing a nation over a compliment. Petty, a diplomatic giant versus a tantrum king. Traoré, calm. Trump, chaos. Hours later, Melania finally stepped into the Oval Office. Trump looked up, desperate for her approval, but her expression was glacial. Donald, you turned an innocent compliment into an international mess, she said, her tone so controlled it hurt more than shouting would have. You embarrass me. Worse, you embarrass this entire presidency. I was defending you, he protested weakly. No, you were defending your ego, she shot back, each word sharp as glass. Ibrahim Traoré spoke about me with more respect than you do most days. It was a final cut, and Trump felt it. Not only had he lost a diplomatic battle, but something far more precious: his wife's respect. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim's phone buzzed nonstop. Global leaders called to commend him for his poise and grace under fire. Macron's voice came through the line with warmth. "Ibrahim, your dignity tonight was extraordinary. The world has seen what real leadership looks like." And so, what began as a misunderstood joke had become a defining moment. One that proved a young African leader could stand his ground, keep his dignity, and leave a world power humble before millions.